Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This Shabbos is the Shabbos before Rosh Hashana, and we're going to learn the mimer of the Shabbos before Rosh Hashana, which is also, of course, Shabbos of Kulchem, although we don't bless the new month. But we do say, of course, that the Tehillim, that Rebbe always held of Habrengen. This is the mimer from 40 years ago. It's not the last mimer of the year, because there's also a mimer of Erev Rosh Hashana, which B'li Neder we hope to do also. And of course, this mimer is connected to Rosh Hashana too. Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem lifnei Havaya lekechem. You are standing upright today, all of you, before the Lord your God. The first verse of the Parsha. This Parsha is always read the Shabbos before Rosh Hashana. And the Parsha that we read last week is read in proximity to Rosh Hashana, but the Shabbos before the Shabbos. And that has the rebuke and the warning, which was mentioned in the Slichas yesterday, etc. This has now the, I don't want to say reconciliation, but the comforting piece as we're going to study. So you're standing upright. And in the Mamorim, the discourses of our Rabbi, of our masters, in Likutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe, and the subsequent Mamorim, subsequent Rabbi, the Mashakos of Atem Nitzavim Hayom Koi al Rosh Hashana, when it says you are standing upright today, the word today, Hayom, is a reference, it's referring to Rosh Hashana, the head of the year. Like we learned in the Zohar, the whole Makom Shenemer Hayom Stam Koyel Rosh Hashana, wherever it says Hayom today, but it doesn't have a day in particular described, that is referring and going on as a reference to Rosh Hashana. Shebiyom Zeh, that on this day, meaning Rosh Hashana, Atem Nitzavim Kulchem lifnei Havaya lekechem, you are all standing upright before the Lord your God, meaning that then all of Israel is standing united as one, singular, as one thing. Even though they have differences within their levels, within their ranks. As it says explicitly in the verse. Afterwards, subsequently, Rashaychem, Shivtechem, the heads of the tribes, up until the wood choppers and the water drawers, the water carriers, Shemona Kanakos of Eser Madreges, like the Zohar explains that this verse is a reference to 10 levels, from the heads, the head of tribes, and then going through the populace, 10 different categories. Nevertheless, on Rosh Hashanah, they are all standing upright in total unison, totally united. And the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe, he adds in his writings on this verse, and it seems to be that this is also based on the discourse of his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, the Mashakos Nitzavim Hulosh Nifel. That which it says, you're standing upright, is in the terminology that it's already happened. In this verb, standing upright, that means that there's someone who made it happen, that made them stand upright. I don't want to give a whole grammar lesson here. There's nifal and poil, when you're passive and doing, etc., etc. The zehu ha'hefresh bein mashakos of Atem Nitzavim, the mashakos of Gabe Hamalachim Surafim Meimdim. This is also the difference from this which it says here, that you are standing upright, firm, and And then it says regarding the angels in Isaiah, Seraphim Aimdim, that the Seraphim, which is a type of angels, the burning fiery angels, which are standing also upright. There it says they have to get up there, stand up on their own. Then you named him Pirushe, Rakshem Aimdim, Lei Namar Echemdim. So it says that they're standing. That means that they got up, they stood up. But it doesn't say how they got up. In other words, they are standing. Nitzavim, but it says standing upright. This term of Nitzavim means that they were set up that way. Pirushe Loshen Nifal. It was accomplished by someone. Someone did this. There is the one who causes this to come into being as such, which makes them stands them upright and in a firm way. Who's the one who does it? Who? Hashem Elikechem. That's the Lord your God. He stands us up. Like it says in the verse, you're standing upright before the Lord your God. From this we understand that He's the one that causes this to happen, stands them up. They should be firmly standing upright in such a way that they are totally in unison and united. And he continues in the Torah, the end of the first chapter, the first paragraph of the Mimer. This is in quotes. Zehu derech klal. This is how it is, in generally speaking. But then the Alter Rebbe goes on and says that's after he speaks about the general sense. He says, but then in particular, derech prat eichu. But then in a particular way, he goes on to explain. The Rebbe says the Yeshleimar. The Rebbe explains this here. Of course, like Menachem says, you can take it to the bank. This is not only going on, the Alter Rebbe is explaining there. When he gets into detail, it's not just going on this idea, referring to this idea that you're all standing. But this idea that they are made cause to stand up. They are stood. I want to say they were stood up, but stood up means something else. Pun was not intended. So, that God, shall we say, standed them up? So, no, God caused this to happen. And that the Alter Rebbe's explanation is also this detail, that God is the one who causes them to stand. God meaning and this is what the verse says. Afterwards, to make you now, we say to keep the covenant, to bring you to the covenant. But if you translate it literally, it means to make you pass through the covenant. And the reason for this is, so first of all, He causes us to come to this covenant, to be part of this covenant from the supernal realm. In other words, He's the one who is bringing us to this. He's making it happen. And now the Rebbe explains, and this is the way a covenant was. You may remember this from the famous covenant of what's called the Bris Ben Habsorim, when God told Abraham that his descendants would be slaves in a land not belonging to him, etc., and they will be abused, etc. So that was, if you remember correctly, it was the animal that had to get caught, and they had to walk between the two. Abraham walked between the two pieces. The Rebbe talks about this. The idea of a covenant, like it is explained in the subsequent part of that mimer. What is the purpose of a covenant? What's the purpose of making this deal, this bond? That in order to make sure that there should be, in order to hold back any changes. Hold back is the wrong word. The term here that he says, the Rebbe says to hold back, to make sure it shouldn't happen. What's the word I'm looking for? deter, but not to prevent. That's a good word. Thank you. To prevent, in order to prevent there from being any changes to their bond and their connection and their union, and amongst those that pass through this covenant. They both pass through the two pieces of one, something that was separated from one body, and then they pass through the. So this is the symbol of this, the symbolism. They take this one body and cut it into two halves. Then they pass through it, which symbolizes that they will stay bonded there between this one body. The irony is that they separated a body to make this point, but that may be part of the point. Just like this body is really one body, even though now it's cut into two halves. So also those that pass through this covenant are then united with complete union and oneness, without any change, in an eternal way, and continuous and constant, should never cease forever. So in order to draw this down, to make this bond with God, this idea of eternity, which is higher than the vision of the heads and the tribes, which is already levels and stages, different classes, so to speak. For this you need a special power that is higher than this eternal bond. That's stam. It had shazel ini la'avrcha. This is the idea of passing through a covenant that God makes with Israel. How do we accomplish this then now? How do we recall? How do we make this happen? How do we strengthen this bond? How do we bring about the awareness and tap into this? So the Rebbe says, this happens through the Torah reading, the Parsha, Atem, Nitzavim, Shabbos, Rosh Hashana. In the portion of this week's Parsha, this week's Torah portion, of you are standing upright on the Shabbos prior to Rosh Hashana. It says in the Zohar, just like when God created the world, it says He looked in the Torah as a blueprint, and He created the world. He also runs the world through Torah. This activates, and gives strength to this covenant that will come through on Rosh Hashana. This Torah reading. But this has to happen through something that we do. It's not going to happen on our own and on its own. This is the idea of remembering and mentioning this covenant. And just like it continues there in the Parsha, just like God swore to your patriarchs, the forefathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Proteus, and more particularly, specifically, Rosh Hashanah, regarding Rosh Hashanah, Amrazal. So the sages tell us in the Talmud, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, tells us, says, recite for me verses of monarchy, kingdom, dominion of God being the king, so that you coronate me, make me the king over you. Zichreines, verses that speak of God's recalling and remembering. So that I remember you, that your remembrance should be before me for good. And how should this happen? How does this get activated, so to speak? B'shofar, with the shofar sounding. And since it says that you're standing upright today, that's a reference to Rosh Hashanah. Move on. So then we know also that this covenant that's happening also has these three stages, these three things. So in other words, the three things that God asks of us to do on Rosh Hashana in these verses. This is, of course, a reference to the verses, we already mentioned this in the Maimer last week. The verses that we say in the Musaf, the unique Musaf prayer of Rosh Hashanah, has three blessings in between the first three and the final three, instead of the usual one blessing that you always have on every Shabbos and every holiday, and Rosh Chodesh, etc. And in the three blessings themselves, they're long. They each have they have 10 verses. 4 from the scripture of Torah, of the 5 books, and 3 from the prophets, and 3 from the scriptures. And it speaks about these ideas, as of course is well known. And this is the source of this. So the Rebbe says that this is also this idea behind these 3 categories we have in the covenant. So what's it all about? In order for the covenant to be in its complete ultimate fashion, in an everlasting, eternal way, for this we need to have total, complete submission to God, total nullification and subservience. That's the idea of saying the verses of kingdom, monarchy, dominion, God's ruling as a king, inyan habitul. This is submission. This is subservience. This which Israel crowns the Holy One, blessed be He, as a king over them. This is the idea of the submission of the people to the king and their subservience. We have this also when we're passing through the covenant, we're making a covenant and a bond and a deal. For you all to be united as one, in order to become part and united, each one of them has to put aside their own uniqueness to unite together as this one new unit. They have to take away, for in a certain sense, their uniqueness, their own individuality. This has to be now nullified and submitted, so to speak. There's the idea that you're standing upright, but you're caused to stand that way. The power to accomplish this in the supernal realm, and to bring about coronation to God, so to speak, in the supernal realms, the power for this and the energy for this comes from God, from the supernal realm itself. Like it says in the Talmudic passage, the Holy One, blessed be He, says, say before me. So He gives us this code, He gives us this method, and then this is what brings it about. God requests this from the supernal realm. A request also gives you the power to do it. If God asks us, then He's already enabling us to bring about what He's asking of us. And the idea of the verses of recollection and remembering, the whole idea of the bond, as we mentioned earlier, even for a long time afterwards, they should still be together. It should last. It shouldn't cease from being an item, one from the other. Because each participant in this cutting, so to speak, of the covenant, it's called cutting a covenant because they have to cut this one body into 2. So the ones who are participants in this bond has to remember. They have to remember who's Zecher Sabris. This idea of the verses of remembering, in order for this bond to be complete in the ultimate fashion, there has to be remembered. To remember the covenant. And indeed, as is the end of the blessing, how we end off this blessing with the 10 verses, we say, "Blessed are you, God, who remembers the covenant." And this is similar to the verse that we have in the parsha, like God spoke to you, and like He swore to your forefathers, to the patriarchs, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. This bond that God did then with the Jewish people in the desert, when Moses, etc., was connected with remembering the covenant that He made with their forefathers. And then the Talmud finishes off saying, how is this activated with the shofar blowing, shofar sounding? The ultimate purpose of the covenant is to draw it down into action, into a deed, actual deeds that are done. Gamba avoidis proteus, and that includes each and every individual's commitment and what they do to serve God in their own personal way. Nitzavim, take out the yellow highlighters. The idea of that you're standing upright is there in every individual's service to God. Each and every individual Israelite has this. And here the Rebbe is giving us the encouragement and the inspiration and the strength and saying, tap in here. Like it says in the beginning of the verse, there are 10 levels within the soul. So when it says you are standing upright before me today, from the head to the lowest, it's a reference to every single person has 10 parts within them. And it has their attributes, their intellectual capacities, and their emotional, their attributes, the sphidus, the intellectual, and in many things we have all types of different ways. So there are 10 levels within the soul of mankind. The Hayom, Gimel, Sichel, Zayin, Midas, the 3 intellectual sphidus, and the 7 regular attributes, the emotional ones, kindness, severity, etc., till Malchus. These 10 levels are different. There are differences within the person. A person is made up of all types of things. Nothing is things are different besides our moods and the way we work and our psyche, etc. But there's the 3 intellectual capacities, and then there's the kindness, the severity, the giving, the taking, the feeling, etc., etc. The idea to persevere, to be, to share and to be part, etc., etc. Each one is different than the other. They're each unique. The covenant comes along to say, hey, you're all one body, you're all one person. Don't split off and get carried away with one. You're one. You have to be all devoted for one thing, for one purpose. They shouldn't all separate off. This connection, this bond that's with them, they should all be devoted and together, should be eternal and everlasting. And so strong. The changes, the fact that they're different from each other, should not cause them, let's say, to have a rift or a fight, but on the contrary, to be part of one strong unit. And just like it is within each individual Israelite within their soul, that's how it is with the nation of Israel as a whole, which is divided up into these 10 levels that we mentioned earlier. Even though these 10 levels are different one from the other, nevertheless we have to accomplish that they should all be standing like one, actually like one. And this is the idea of the shofar. The shofar which sounded, the shofar al Hashem Shapram Asechem. We said this in last week's Maimer. Like the Medrash tells us that the word shofar comes from the word of improving and making beautiful. We mentioned last week the midwife who was called Shifra. She was called Shifra because she made the baby look beautiful, right? The sister of Moses, and the mother of Moses. One was Shifra, one was Pua. Hainu she the Av Shemasechem Shadifne Zehim Kvar Toivrim, even though your things were already to improve, to make it look beautiful, means that it could already be good. So even though your deeds before this were already good, nevertheless, they have to be improved. They have to be beautified. They have to, and therefore you have to have repentance, return. Now the Rebbe brings here the nuance that even the all righteous also have tshuva, repentance, return, because everyone can grow no matter what. So this is talking about the idea of a tzaddik tshuva, which we refer to usually as tshuva ilah, the supernal way of tshuva, which is just the idea of improvement and growth, and not necessarily rectification of misdeed. Necessarily not. Although there's a direct relation, because once there's growth, the previous way was inadequate once you've grown, but it was okay for that time. And that's the idea of Lasov Tzaddikai B'tiyufta. Shezeb Ma'aseh B'Peil Shubishleim is that this is actually so. The person is already all righteous, Tzaddikaya. Yi Yanikir in Tshuva, nevertheless, you should have the idea of repentance, which here is growth. That's what the covenant is about. And the idea of shofar is the idea of drawing down pleasure. What does pleasure mean? Pleasure is satisfaction of the essence of the soul. Therefore, there's no reason, and therefore there's no reasoning with pleasure, and therefore doesn't have to make sense, because pleasure is just something, because that's how you like it. That's it. So it's something which is in the essence of the soul. And therefore it's the idea of, that's the whole idea of return, the growth, to get to the ultimate, and that's the source of this covenant, the bond, to get to there. And it's like the pleasure which is in the essence of the soul. I'm sorry. And so in the vehicle, the conduit to get to the pleasure is what your deeds are. So the pleasure and something which is a part of the pleasure, so to speak, a small array of it, so to speak, comes within the actual deed that'll bring about, that'll accomplish this pleasure. So gam b'maisim pratim b'ol hatanugim pratim. Therefore, this comes into smaller deeds and in smaller pleasures. Like it's explained in several places in Chassidus. One of the things, and we've had this in the past, where do you say is the seat of pleasure? Where's the seat of the will of a person? It's everywhere, because as soon as you want something with the hand, it happens immediately, and that's where it is. It's all encompassing, and therefore the pleasure is in every part of the soul, and therefore in the whole body, everywhere. So you wanted to get somewhere, getting there, it's in the feet, the pleasure. So it goes down to the heel of your foot. Like the story in the Gemara, story in Tractate Gittin, if you want to look it up, on page 56. But in that story, the Rebbe doesn't say the story, so if we want to refer to it, you can refer to it. And the Torah, and it is the Rebbe does mention the idea of anything in Torah is an instruction, a lesson in how we serve God. Because our ultimate purpose we were created for was to serve our Creator, the one who acquired us, brought us about, created us. At the end of the story, this person wasn't growing anymore. Their heel grew. And within the person itself that it already stopped growing, we're talking about the part of the body that grows the least, it's the heel. The heel, in other words, you want to test if something is hot, you can put your heel. It's least lively, etc. Least sensitive. The heel of the foot. His body had already also passed over the age of growth. But since he had such a pleasure, so the heel grew. And like it says in Proverbs, that good news strengthens and broadens the bone. So, in other words, pleasure permeates the whole body. Here it was even a question of growth. This is brought about through the shofar blowing. Like we have in the Alter Rebbe's Memorim in the discourses of Rosh Hashana. This is the reason that we don't blow shofar when Rosh Hashana falls out on Shabbos. Because the pleasure that's accomplished with shofar is already accomplished with Shabbos, so it's not necessary. It will be redundant. Because we know that Shabbos is called pleasure, like it says like the verse in Isaiah says, and that's what we're supposed to serve God on Shabbos through pleasure, honor the Shabbos through pleasure. To the extent that Shabbos, it's a mitzvah to actually honor the Shabbos with physical pleasure. To eat well and drink well and even sleep on Shabbos is considered, it says Shina b'Shabbos Tainuk. Sleeping is also pleasure. There's a Chassidic dictum that says if sleeping is pleasure, then certainly study is pleasure. Right? For this reason, the shofar doesn't have a melody really. It's just one straight, simple sound. Ki ha-hamshacha. Now, it could be, the notes may go up and down, but it's not a real tune. Ki ha-hamshacha the kela shofar l'mayla b'kel chitzeni. Hamislavish basis had deeper. For that matter, a sound of speech when you talk. So the words are made up of sound waves, and the way the mouth and the 5 parts of the mouth switch around, they turn it into words. Words have messages, passages, ideas, nuances that get conveyed through speech, through the various sounds, how sound changes. Right? This is all in the mimer, the famous mimer that Rebbe says that anyone who blows shofar should study on the morning of Rosh Hashana. The Rebbe is obviously referencing it here, even though I don't see them bring it explicitly. Well, they actually, it says, I'm sure it's referred to in the references. But anyway, that being said, the shofar is a plain sound. It's not broken up into a melody, into a tune, into sounds that could sound like words, etc. It's just a straight sound. So it's higher. That which is drawn forth with the sound of the shofar is higher than a more outward type of sound, which then has to get enclosed into letters and words of speech. It comes to the depth. It's an inner sound that isn't. Ironically, it says that it's not heard, but it means it's conveying without a message that is defined. It's from the depth. It's an undefined yet. It is so deep. This is the sound that comes from the innermost of the heart. That's why we make this sound. We blow from the horn of an animal specifically, and preferably and therefore specifically the shofar of a mountain goat, an ibex, like it says in Tehillim, the high mountains are for the Ya'elim, the Yoel, the mountain goat, which can jump and to very high heights. Like it explains there in the mimer, everything is specific and everything is significant. You want it to be from the simplest, pristine simplicity. These also illustrate the idea of higher than limitations and measurements, and higher than our understanding. In other words, the mountain goat isn't limited to just walking around on the ground and climbing mountains. It goes higher and higher and higher. It's very interesting to see actually how precarious the peaks that they can actually climb and get to. Anyway, it's not right. It's not National Geographic here. That is the general idea of a covenant. It doesn't even have to make sense, but you make a deal. We're connecting. That's it. Just so. That's the idea of you are standing upright today, all of you. The Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, and of course, this is exactly 40 years ago on the Shabbos Rosh Hashanah that Rebbe said this gives us extra strength, it has significance. Since on Rosh Hashanah, this actually comes into the world, the covenant. And I share for a moment that I had the great merit and privilege to be present when the Rebbe said the Maimer. Before this, there has to be, before Rosh Hashanah happens, we read it in the Shabbos before. Why the necessity of both? Like the Rebbe said earlier, that activates it when you read it in Torah. The Rebbe repeats here what he said earlier. Like the Zohar says, look in the Torah. That's how the world is created. God created the world by looking at the Torah. So he makes the world keep turning. To draw it into the world, it has to first be through Torah. That's the idea of, like the Rebbe mentioned earlier, that they are standing upright by someone who made them stand. Through reading this in the Torah, the Lord your God makes it happen. He causes it to be that you should be standing firm and upright, all of you united as one. And more than that, that you should be standing upright like a king stands firm and upright. Like that Tzemach explains. Now, I want to point out that it doesn't say it, but the birthday of the Tzemach Tzedek is on the 29th day of El. This Fabrengen was on the 28th day of El, Erev, on the eve of the birthday of the Tzemach Tzedek. So although the Rebbe doesn't say specifically, doesn't call him the Bal Yom Holedes, but he quotes him here extensively. And that's, of course, the Rebbe's paternal great-great-grandfather. So, Nitzavim Amid B'Teikif Shel Melech, the one who stands up firmly and upright is standing with the steadfastness of the king. And that's because he is subservient and submissive to the king. And therefore, like it says, the servant of a king is already a king, because he represents the king totally. He's nothing on his own. And like it's explained in the Torah without the Rebbe, that there is a person, there's no such thing as a king without a people, without a nation, right? The Rebbe will explain it, but if somebody goes onto a desert island, they're stuck in a desert island, they're eating coconuts, they're there for 2-3 years, and then they're discovered, and the guy says, I'm the king here. You're not a king. Who are you ruling over? Nothing. You're not a king. You're just stuck. You can only be a king if there are subjects. So, even though one of the interpretations of the word am is an interesting word, meaning oimumus, which are coals that are not really burning anymore. They're when the coals have become maybe something like embers, whatever, they're called oimumus. They're not at their potential, but they're something which could be. So that's the idea of a nation. It could be worked with. There's another, you could say is like the word im, which means with him. That means they're equals. They're relative to. They could all be together. So that's another idea of what nation means. So it has potential, and it also has um, bond. The word I'm looking for is cohesiveness, etc. And to be together. So the king is a person. They're also people. It's like it's also brought in several places. Let's say a person is with tens of thousands of things that were created, whether they're animals and mineral or other things, but they're not human beings. They don't speak. You can't be a king, like we mentioned. That's it. You can only be a king over people. It's the same, equal in terms of what we're dealing with. That's the idea of standing upright, like the king stands upright. We already read in the Torah, the Shabbos prior to Rosh Hashana, through the reading of the Torah, since we know that the Torah and the Holy One, blessed be He, is all one thing. This activates and draws forth in Yisrael this idea into Israel, into the Israelites. That brings about within every Israelite that Israel, the Torah, and the Holy One, blessed be He, are also all one. The Tachlis or Achdus, in the ultimate of unity, unison, in a bond, in a covenant, Kulam lachodim kiechad, all together as one. V'hinei inizem word b'drush Chassidus. This idea is explained in the passages of the Chassidic Discourse as Hayom in the innermost of the Torah, the inner part of Torah. In a way that we can also be sustained by it, and therefore brings about growth. It draws down and it's enclosed in the intellect of man. It becomes like your sustenance is like your food and your nourishment. It's like that. It becomes then part of your flesh and blood and flesh, like your own flesh. And therefore the Rebbe says, maybe the will of God it should be drawn down from the flesh and blood of the body, the blood and the flesh of the body, the pashtus in simple physical sense. Take the blessing, tap into this, accept this blessing from the Rebbe 40 years ago, today coming to fruition. Especially in the Shabbos before Rosh Hashana, that from the Shabbos blesses all the subsequent days, as it says in the Zohar, on Hayom the Rosh Hashana, including also the day of Rosh Hashana. It says the day of Rosh Hashana because even though it's 2 days, it's considered one long day. That there should be the blessing amongst Israel and Israelites, beguf, benefesh, bepashtas, physically and spiritually, actually in the most simple, actual fashion. Pirush, what do I mean? That they should be blessed, being inscribed and sealed in a good way, for a good, sweet year. In goodness, that's that you could see it and it's revealed. Spiritually and materially, materially and spiritually, and materially and spiritually together, and with happiness and gladness of heart.